Changes in the early childhood profession. This information comes from Chapter 1 in your Morrison textbook. There has been several changes in the early childhood education profession over the years. It has come a long way since its inception of untrained women caring for young children in their home, all the way up to people with advanced degrees using scientific knowledge to prepare learning environments for young children to grow and thrive. Some important changes that I would like to share with you are that there has been, over the last 50 to 60 years, an increase in scientific knowledge, which this has shifted the views of children from being passive learners. Maybe you remember that old expression, children should be seen and not heard, just simply being kind of like lumps in their environment, not really interactive. All they do is, sleep and cry. Really what recent neuroscience and education research has shared with us is that young children are very active, capable learners, and toddlers and preschoolers can do things that a generation ago perhaps individuals might thought would have been impossible for them to think in certain ways or learn certain tasks. The downside to this change, though, is that while children are certainly very capable learners and they do need to be active, one downside is that I think sometimes this idea has really pushed children, all children, to work at a much higher level than perhaps is appropriate for their age. So it is very important to balance this idea that while they are capable of learning and sharing and thinking and wondering and solving and expressing at higher levels and in more detail and more depth, it is important to never lose sight of what would be developmentally appropriate for each child. The second change to the profession is there have been research-based programs that have been developed for young children, even as young as newborns, meaning that scientists and psychologists and educators are curious to understand the capacity of young children, and that there has been wonderful research done to support the growth of newborns, children as young as newborns, which means that that there's beneficial environmental stimuli that could be added to a classroom or your home to encourage children to focus on an object, and that focusing on an object encourages that child to draw attention to that, and that attention and focusing is building a set of connective tissue in the brain and building more neurons and more links in that brain, therefore causing that child to have a healthy brain development. The third change in the profession would be that there, and following research-based information, that there's been several notable studies that have focused on the importance of high quality care. So particularly for those from low-income families, perhaps you've heard about the achievement gap in education, where students from low-income and minority and as a second language homes tend to not achieve the same success in typical American classrooms as their middle-class English-speaking white peers. Well, there's been several studies listed on the slide that indicate that if children, all children, receive high-quality care, but particularly from those low-income families, there's tremendous short and long-term benefits from things like increased vocabulary, which has been connected to early reading ability, and reading ability is connected to high school graduation. So children who are in an early childhood environment where they're being read to, sung to, talked to, encouraged to talk with their peers, with their teachers, those children have higher vocabularies, and higher vocabularies tend to yield stronger interest in reading, and stronger interest in reading tends to lead to more knowledge creation, and more knowledge creation tends to lead to less grades being repeated, better vocabulary to solve social problems instead of resorting to tantrums and fighting. The benefits go on. Another change to the early childhood profession is that more than 75% of all 4-year-olds are enrolled in some sort of preschool program, and that translates to about roughly 1.1 million children are in state-funded programs. So in Pennsylvania, our state-funded program would be pre-K counts. So there's about 1,000,001 children in programs similar to pre-K counts. That's a lot of kids nationwide. So that means that there needs to be educators who are prepared to meet the needs, utilizing the best practices that we have available to understanding theory, understanding research, to create these learning environments for young children to thrive. Another change is that politicians are rediscovering young children, and I have rediscovering in quotes because I'm like, well, they've always been here. We've always needed care for young children. However, after the Great Recession in 2007 to roughly 2010, a lot of funding was cut to schools and programs. Maybe you remember that. Maybe you were in school yourself, or maybe you had children in childcare programs, and you remember that class sizes got bigger, teachers got laid off, there was less materials to go around, there was less resources for children, because childcare centers had to adapt to the decrease in funding. Well, after that period, politicians, particularly those in Congress, have dedicated money to help to bolster childcare. So that's something that we'll talk a lot about when we get to our advocacy topic in early childhood education. And now with the coronavirus, it's becoming quite clear how important early childcare is, not just to the health and well-being of families and the growth of children, but to the economy. So it will be interesting to see where this goes in the next year or two as a nation, as we come to grips with what has been happening to our childcare systems. When childcares are closed, moms and dads can't go to work. So that has a negative impact on the economy.